Good morning. We left off at the introduction of Ichabod Crane. So I'll reread a little bit of that so we can pick up to the legend of Sleepy Hollow. In this byplace of nature, there abode in a remote period of American history, that is to say, some 30 years since, a worthy wight of the name of Ichabod Crane, who sojourned, or as he expressed it, tarried, in Sleepy Hollow for the purpose of instructing the children of the vicinity. He was a native of Connecticut, a state which supplies the Union with pioneers for the mind as well as for the forest, and sends forth yearly its legions of frontier woodsmen and country schoolmasters. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall, but exceedingly lank, skinny, with narrow shoulders and long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat on top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long sniped nose, so that when it looked like a weathercock perched upon its spindle neck and tell which way the wind blew. So he looked like a weather vane. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day, with his clothes bagging and fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. His schoolhouse was a low building of one large room, rudely constructed of logs. The windows partly glazed and partly patched with leaves of old copybooks. It was most ingeniously secured at vacant hours by a withe twisted in the handle of the door, and stakes set against the window shutters, so that, though a thief might get in with perfect ease, he would find some embarrassment in getting out. An idea most probably borrowed by the architect, Jost van Houten, from the mystery of an eel pot. The schoolhouse stood in a rather lonely but pleasant situation, just at the foot of a woody hill, with a brook running close by and a formidable birch tree growing at one end of it. From hence the low murmur of his pupils' voices, conning over their lessons, might be heard in a drowsy summer's day, like the hum of a beehive, interpreted now and then by an authoritative voice of the master, and the tone of menace or command, or peradventure by the appalling sound of the birch as he urged some tardy loiterer along the flowery path of knowledge. Truth to say, he was a conscientious man, and ever bore in mind the golden maxim, "Spare not the rod and spoil the child." That means he believed in spanking them. Oh. Ichabod Crane's scholars certainly were not spoiled. So it seems that he spanked his students. Aw, poor students. This is the next part. I was going to see if there is a picture of the students. Not yet. We'll go back and see students in a bit. There's Ichabod. I would not have imagined, however, that he was one of those cruel potentates of the school who joy in the smart of their subjects. On the contrary, he administered justice with discrimination rather than severity, taking the burden off the backs of the weak and laying it on those of the strong. Your mere puny stripling that winced at the least flourish of the rod was passed by with indulgences, but the claims of justice were satisfied by inflicting a double portion on some little tough, wrong-headed, broad-skirted Dutch urchin, so in other words, bullies, bad children, who sulked and swelled and grew dogged and sullen beneath the birch. The birch is a twig from the tree, or a stick from the tree that he used for spanking. All this he called doing his duty by their parents, and never inflicted a chastisement or a fussing, a chastisement without following it by the assurance so consolatory to the smarting urchin. Urchin is way of saying a little child, little ruffian, that he would remember it and thank him for it to the longest day that he lived. So his students liked him, even though he was strict. When school hours were over, he was even the companion and playmate of the larger boys. Oh, so they got along and played together. And on holiday afternoons would convoy some of the smaller ones home who happened to have pretty sisters or good housewives for mothers, noted for their comforts of the cupboard. Food, in other words. He liked to eat. Indeed, it behooved him to keep on good terms with the pupils. The revenue arising from his school was small, and he would have scarcely sufficient to furnish him with daily bread, for he was a huge feeder, and though lank, had the dilating powers of an anaconda. He could eat a lot, like those snakes that swallow those large animals. But to help out the maintenance, he was, according to the country custom in those parts, boarded and lodged, housed and fed, at the houses of the farmers, whose children he instructed. With these he lived successively a week at a time, thus going the rounds of the neighborhood with all his worldly effects tied in a cotton handkerchief. So we've learned that Ichabod Crane lived with all the children he taught. He was strict, he was very skinny, but he ate a lot, and he liked to follow and walk home with students whose family were good cooks. So, we'll keep learning more about Ichabod Crane as we go along. Until next time.